actually make something of yourself once you're born into a lower class, for example? Or are you just stuck there? Are you just trapped because of the environment, because of society, because that is what you were born into? So they're challenging that. And then you see a connection with European naturalists. So, you know, the American literary movements are not just like their own thing. Many of the concepts and ideas explored within these movements already occurred in Europe. World War I is coming. And so because naturalism occurs from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, even going up until, you know, approximately 1920, World War I is occurring in 1914, we see a lot of change coming with the impending World War. What is that like? What do you think is coming with World War I? Like, can you make any sense of this? Yeah. Yes. Did I skip that? Oh, I did. Yes. Although, can we talk about World War I and then go back to that? Go ahead.
Does it bring nihilism?
What?
Does it bring nihilism?
No. Oh, nihilism.
Yeah.
Yes. Nihilism is basically hopelessness. So there is that, and a fear of kind of this mass tragedy coming. but also what is happening in terms of preparing ourselves to fight in World War I? Like, what are we doing as a country? Yeah.
I mean, like, it kind of brings about another revolution of more industry and creating more and more weapons and advancing technology.
Yes.
So we're devoting
Exactly.
everything. It's a total war, so we're devoting everything we have to this war.
Yes.
And creating so many things in the industry for this war.
Yes, and so you said a mass increase in technology, and I want to focus in on that a little bit because with the incoming World War, we see increased weaponization. We see increased weaponization in the sense that they are capable of mass destruction. Bigger weapons, more capable of mass destruction. So I'll leave it at that. Nick.
I was going to just say, like, nationalism, like everyone feels the American pride, and that when the men go to war, the women feel more important because they're able to work in the factories and help, you know, feed the soldiers. So like everyone's working together. So like a bigger community kind of.
Yes, right. Yeah. So there is that. And you know, I don't know what the naturalist take is on the American nationalism. I would say that it's very cynical. Like, you can have pride, but eventually you're going to get squashed. That's probably what a naturalist would say. And I'm going to just point out, I'll get to subject matter after I talk about Charles Darwin, but in one of your subject matter notes, it says that naturalist writers tend to focus on raw and unpleasant experiences which reduce characters to degrading behavior in their struggle to survive. I'll come back to this, but I just wanted to say that if you're thinking about World War I coming around the corner, that makes sense. Not only does that make sense in terms of like what the effect that war has on people, but also if you're thinking about class struggle, like what effect does poverty have on people? Sometimes individuals are stripped of their means to survive, and so in order to survive, they are reduced to degrading behavior. That is something that naturalists focus on. Okay, so going back to historically and socially, there is a new focus on Charles Darwin's evolutionary theory because now there is commentary on social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is a thing that kind of emerges from a particular individual. Who knows anything about social Darwinism?
The idea that it's like natural selection of people, so the fittest people are getting the best. So it's saying that since like the Germans used to, because they felt they had high society, so they were above like Africans and people who were less civilized.
Great. Yeah. All right. I feel like I've got good history consultants in this room. So Herbert Spencer was a 19th century philosopher who is really trying to promote the idea of social Darwinism. And social Darwinism is exactly what Mitchell just said. Essentially, it's a theory of natural selection to social, political, and economic issues. So in its simplest form, like social Darwinism follows the idea of the strong survive, including human issues. This theory was used to promote the idea that the white European race was superior to others and therefore destined to rule over them. So, with the rise of this theory, we're seeing a lot of tension in terms of class struggle and what it means to be born into the class that you're born into, and survival of the fittest when it comes to things like social issues and economic issues and political issues. So that is another thing that really heavily influences the naturalist writing. So let's move on to subject matter, does anybody have any questions so far? I haven't really paused. Yeah? I talked about how now people are becoming disillusioned and pessimistic about the role that the Industrial Revolution has had on the U.S. So now naturalist writers are starting to see people as nothing but commodities and cogs in a machine. Because with mass industry comes factories, factory workers, mass production. You need to get a lot out and quickly. So in terms of subject matter, I already talked about naturalist writers focus on the raw and unpleasant experiences which reduce characters to degrading behavior in their struggle to survive, number one. And then secondly, they focus on dull, ordinary, daily existence and how that is exposed to show heroic or adventurous acts of violence and passion leading to desperate moments and violent death. So actually, there's a tension there, and in style, I'll talk about the tension a little bit more, but I'll just say that in terms of subject matter, naturalist writers are presenting characters who are going about their daily lives, and then they can be heroic, and even in some stories they rise to be almost a hero, but then eventually they die a terrible death. So, almost a hero, and then thwarted. Fate and hubris affect characters. Hubris. What does the word hubris mean? H-U-B-R-I-S. Hubris.
It's kind of like a confidence in oneself.
But like,
Isn't it the excessive pride?
yeah, so yes and yes. Like excessive confidence in oneself or excessive pride. So here, we're looking at, fate. We talked about fate. Hubris also affects the characters in naturalist writing, and hubris is excessive pride. But ultimately, the controlling force is society and environment. Also, you see a chronicle of despair, and some of the novels, John Steinbeck, for example, writes a novel of degeneration. Degenerate, like, what does that mean, degeneration? Going down. Yeah, so like, what is that? I mean, like, would it be like optimistic? Yeah.
It's like backtracking, like people are talking about the country or that people aren't even for.
Yeah, right. So if you're thinking about like retrograde versus it's like you're at a place and you're only then with degeneration going backwards or getting worse. Right. So you see Steinbeck writes a lot of works that have to do with that kind of concept. Naturalist style is pretty easy to understand once you understand their central ideals. So characters are typically ill-educated, lower class, unsophisticated, governed by heredity, instinct, and passion. Attempts at free will are thwarted by forces beyond their control. Writers see characters as animals without free will, helpless objects. Social Darwinism helps explain fates to reader. So in that very complex bullet, you're seeing a lot of the naturalist idea of what's happening in society being captured in their writing and the way they're depicting the characters in their stories. Yeah.
So are most of these works kind of racist?
They are not racist, they are classist. Although I'm just trying to think if there's any examples of racism in it. Not that I'm aware of, but probably. If we're seeing, people as helpless objects and defined by heredity and defined by social class, I'm sure that there's some racism in there too. Not that I can come up with off the top of my head, but definitely there is classism, which is just it's stereotyping against a certain class. So settings in naturalist writing are typically urban, as I said. And that makes sense. There's mass urbanization happening. Still a ton, even more so now, a ton of people are moving to cities. And in cities, you see all classes. So in cities, you have diversity, you have all classes represented, lower, very high class, middle class. So it makes sense that a naturalist writer would want to focus on cities for their, and all the degeneration that comes in cities and kind of how cities can boom or bust. It just makes sense. In number 3, what does clinical mean? So writers in the naturalism movement tend to focus on using a clinical panoramic perspective, objective and detached. What do you think that means, clinical? Why use that word? Yeah.
Clinical, and then I see objective, so that means kind of there's guidelines or standards that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
Guidelines, standards. Okay. Other definitions? Think about somebody made a good inference based on the word clinic and what a clinic is like, and then what a clinical diagnosis is. Yeah.
This could be completely wrong, but when I see the whole kind of thing medicine, and kind of there's a specific way of doing things, and a specific way that your